Augustus McPherson did not leave $50,000 on the grand mahogany table in his main living room by accident. No, my dear friend, a man like Augustus, who had built a real estate empire from nothing, did not make careless mistakes with his money. Those stacks of bills, bound with elastic bands and scattered with calculated negligence among old magazines and overdue invoices, were not an error. They were a trap, a brutal, cold, and ruthless test he applied to anyone who dared cross the threshold of his mansion to work. And until that day, no one, absolutely no one, had resisted. Cleaners, housekeepers, gardeners. Sooner or later, greed won the battle. A quick hand, a bill slipped into a pocket, the internal justification that the old man had more than enough money. Augustus had seen it all from the shadows of his study, with a bitter smile on his lips, confirming again and again his darkest theory, that everyone, without exception, has a price. But before I tell you what happened that day, and how a small child was about to challenge all the laws of that embittered man, I heartily invite you to subscribe to our channel, click the bell icon, and please, leave me a comment below telling me from which city or country in Canada or elsewhere you are listening to us today. I love reading your messages and knowing how far our stories of faith and hope reach. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you these soul-stirring tales. Now, let's return to the McPherson estate. Augustus was 55, but his gaze carried the weight of a century of disappointments. He lived alone in that immense house, surrounded by luxuries that no longer gave him pleasure, but instead served as armor. Its marble walls and solid oak doors were not there to impress visitors, but to keep the world at bay. He had become a reclusive man, convinced that anyone who approached him sought only one thing: his fortune. His own family had betrayed him in the past. His ex-wives had taken large chunks of his estate, and his supposed friends had vanished. As soon as he cut off the tap of loans, they never repaid. This one will be just like the others, Augustus muttered to himself, adjusting the focus of the security camera on his monitor screen. He was sitting in his office with the blinds drawn, observing the crisp image of the living room. There was the money, $50,000 in cash, an amount that could change anyone's life, carelessly strewn as if it were garbage. For Augustus, that money was just paper, but he knew that for the woman about to enter, it represented the difference between eating or going hungry, between having a roof over her head or sleeping on the street, and he counted on that desperation. He wanted her to steal. Deep in his hardened heart, Augustus wished her to fail the test, so he could tell himself once more, "See? I was right. No one can be trusted." The doorbell of the mansion resonated, a deep, grave sound that seemed to vibrate the cold air of the house. On the other side of the immense carved wooden door, Eleanor waited. Eleanor was 30, but life's hardships had drawn lines of worry on her face that made her appear older. She wore a simple dress, clean and carefully ironed, but worn from years of use and washing. Her shoes, polished that very morning, had thin soles from so much walking, searching for opportunities that were denied to her again and again. But Eleanor was not alone. Clinging to her hand, her knuckles white from gripping so tightly, was Beatrice, her 7-year-old daughter, a child with large, observant eyes, her hair tied in 2 perfect braids, and a school uniform that was a little short in the sleeves. Eleanor was trembling. She needed this job. God knew how much she needed it. Her husband had died 2 years ago in a construction accident, leaving them with nothing but debts and immense grief. Since then, Eleanor had cleaned floors, washed other people's clothes, and cared for the elderly. But the debts kept growing, and the rent for their small room on the city's outskirts was 3 months overdue. If she didn't get this live-in position at Mr. McPherson's mansion, they would be on the street by the end of the week. The door opened automatically with an electric hum. "Come in," a voice thundered through the intercom. It was dry, authoritarian. Eleanor took a deep breath, discreetly crossed herself, and looked at her daughter. "Remember what I told you, my love," Eleanor whispered, crouching to Bee's eye level. "You stay seated, quietly, and do your homework. Don't touch anything. This gentleman is very strict, and he's doing us a huge favor by letting you come. Understood?" "Yes, Mommy, I won't touch anything," Bee replied in a sweet voice, hugging her patched backpack like a shield. They entered. The mansion's foyer was so large that their small room would fit in it twice over. The floor gleamed so brightly, it looked like a mirror of water. Bee looked at everything with fascination, but also with fear. Everything there screamed money, power, and do not touch. Augustus emerged from his study to greet them. He did not shake their hands. He stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at them with disdain, like a king surveying his poorest subjects. His gaze lingered on the child with annoyance. "I told you on the phone that I don't like children, Mrs. Eleanor," Augustus said without a greeting. "They make noise, break things, and make messes." "I know, Mr. Macpherson, and I apologize profusely," Eleanor hurried to say, her voice trembling but dignified. "But I have no one to leave her with after school. I promise you won't even notice her presence. She's very good, very studious, and I'll work twice as hard to compensate. Please, sir, we need this job." Augustus descended the steps slowly, relishing the power he held over this woman. He stopped in front of them. He could smell Eleanor's fear, but he also noticed something else, a silent dignity. This bothered him. He preferred people who groveled or those who were brazen. Dignity and poverty seemed like a lie to him. "All right," he said coldly. "But at the first complaint, the first noise, or the first object out of place, both of you are out on the street. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much." "Don't thank me yet. Start with the living room. It's a mess. There are papers and things I left last night working. Tidy everything. Dust and vacuum the carpets. I'll be in my study. I don't want to be disturbed." Augustus pointed towards the large double doors of the main living room. He knew exactly what lay behind those doors. He knew the temptation was served on a silver platter. "And you, child," Augustus said, directing his severe gaze at Bea, "sit in a corner and don't move." Bea nodded, intimidated, and hid a little further behind her mother's leg. Eleanor and Bea walked towards the living room. Eleanor pushed open the heavy doors and entered. The room was majestic, with large windows overlooking an immaculate garden. But in the center, on the coffee table, chaos reigned. Magazines, open folders, expensive pens, and money, lots of money. Eleanor swallowed hard. She had never seen so many bills together in her life, but her survival instinct and her values were quicker. "Bea, sit on that sofa in the corner, take out your notebooks, and start studying. Mom's going to get the cleaning supplies from the kitchen. I'll be back in a minute. Don't get up." Eleanor hurried off to the kitchen, eager to start as soon as possible to prove her worth, leaving little Bea alone in that immense room, with the heavy silence of the mansion and $50,000 staring at her from the table. In his study, Augustus settled into his leather chair, interlaced his fingers, and fixed his gaze on the screen. The show was about to begin. The mother was gone, the child was alone, the trap was open, and the prey was inside. "Let's see what you're made of, daughter of necessity," Augustus whispered, his eyes fixed on the small child who timidly began to look up from her backpack towards the forbidden table, while Eleanor searched for the bucket and mop in the cupboards of that immense, cold kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't just the fear of Mr. Augustus and his volatile temper. It was the weight of a promise she carried on her shoulders, a promise made amidst tears and the antiseptic smell of a public hospital 2 years ago. Eleanor's life had not always been gray. There was a time when, though humble, the days had color. Her husband Michael was a bricklayer with large hands and an easy smile. They had no luxuries, living day to day, but in their small home, love and Bea's laughter were never absent. Michael used to come home from work covered in cement dust, and the first thing he would do, even before washing up, was lift his little genius into the air, because Bea, from a very young age, proved to be different. While other girls played with dolls, Bea counted. She counted the steps. She counted the beans before her mother put them in the pot. She added the numbers on passing car license plates. "This child is going to be someone important, Eleanor," Michael would say proudly, watching her solve sums in her head that he could barely do with paper and pencil. "She won't carry bricks like me. She'll build the buildings. But fate sometimes has cruel plans that we cannot comprehend." One rainy morning, an unsecured scaffold at the construction site gave way. The fall was fatal. Eleanor arrived at the hospital just in time to see the light fade from her life partner's eyes. "Promise me," Michael whispered with his last breath, squeezing Eleanor's hand with the little strength he had left. "Promise me she will study, that she will never lack schooling. Don't let her mind get lost in poverty. Eleanor, do whatever you have to do, but let Bea have a future. I promise you, my love. I swear it on my life," she sobbed. From that day, Eleanor lived only to fulfill that promise. She sold the few good pieces of furniture they had. She moved to a cramped room in a challenging neighborhood where rents were cheap and accepted any honest job that appeared. She cleaned public washrooms, scrubbed dishes in restaurants until her hands cracked and bled, cared for the sick at night, all to pay for Bea's second-hand books, her uniform, and to ensure she never went to school on an empty stomach. even if Eleanor had to dine on just a glass of water. Poverty hurts, my friends, but it hurts more when you see a child's potential wasted for lack of opportunity. B was brilliant. Her teachers said so. But what good was being brilliant if they didn't even have money for new pencils? B did her homework with pencil stubs she found discarded at school and used the backs of old invoice sheets to practice her multiplications. That morning, before arriving at Mr. Augustus's mansion, Eleanor had opened the fridge. There was only half a bottle of milk and a piece of stale bread. That was the reality. If Mr. Augustus fired her, the promise to Michael would be broken. There would be no school, no future, only the street and hunger. In the mansion's kitchen, Eleanor wiped away a treacherous tear rolling down her cheek. "Don't cry," she told herself firmly. "Michael is watching you. Be strong for B." She grabbed the cleaning products with determination. She didn't know that across the hall, in the living room, her little daughter was about to face a test that had nothing to do with cleaning, but with the very essence of who they were. Bia, sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, looked at the table. For a child who loved the logical order of numbers, what lay before her was an aberration. She didn't see $50,000 as a treasure to spend. She saw disorder. She saw chaos. Her structured, analytical mind could not bear to see things out of place. The bills were mixed up, some face up, others folded, confused among crumpled papers. For B, the world was a confusing and sometimes terrifying place since Dad left. Numbers were her refuge, because numbers never lied, never changed, and always had a solution if you thought hard enough. And that table was a mathematical problem that needed to be solved, unaware that she was being observed by a hidden camera, and unaware that her mother's future depended on her next moves. The child placed her backpack on the floor. Her small, worn shoes touched the Persian rug. She approached the table, not with a thief's greed, but with the curiosity of a scientist about to fix something broken. The silence in Augustus Macpherson's mansion was not peace. It was a warning. It was that heavy kind of silence felt in museums or mausoleums, where even breathing too loudly seems an offense. As Eleanor began to scrub the kitchen tiles with an energy born of panic, she felt that oppressive atmosphere trying to suffocate her. Every corner of that house screamed loneliness, but it also screamed, "You don't belong here." Eleanor rubbed the granite countertop until her arms ached. She couldn't afford a single mistake. She knew Mr. Augustus was a man who looked for the slightest excuse to fire her. She had seen that look before in other wealthy employers, that mix of contempt and suspicion, as if being poor were a contagious disease or proof of a lack of character. But Eleanor held her dignity intact. Her shoes might be broken, but her work ethic was ironclad. "Please, dear God," she whispered as she rinsed the cloth, "make her behave, make her quiet, make her invisible." Meanwhile, in the dimness of his fortified study, Augustus never took his eyes off the security monitors. The bluish light of the screens illuminated his face, further highlighting the wrinkles of bitterness around his mouth. There was the child on screen number 4. Augustus leaned forward in his leather chair, his eyes narrowed. B had gotten up from the sofa. "There she is," Augustus murmured in a hoarse voice, speaking to the solitude of his office. "Curiosity killed the cat, child, and greed will kill your mother's job." For Augustus, what was about to happen was a script he had seen 1,000 times. In his mind, poverty was synonymous with desperation, and desperation always led to theft. He had left that $50,000 there, not as a gift, but as a guillotine. He expected to see the child grab a wad, hide it in her school backpack or pockets. He expected to see her run to the kitchen to give it to her mother, and then see the mother hide it in her underwear. It was a cynical vision, yes, but life had taught him to expect the worst to avoid disappointment. If this story is already touching your heart, if you feel the anguish of this mother and the innocence of this child facing a world that judges them without knowing them, tell me in the comments if you ever experienced something similar, if you ever felt unjustly judged. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss how this story ends, because I assure you, what's coming will surprise you. Let's return to screen number 4. Bia approached the coffee table with slow, silent steps. Her canvas shoes barely made a sound on the Persian rug that cost more than the house where they lived. Augustus held his breath. His finger was ready on the intercom button to shout thief the exact moment the child's hand touched the money with the intention of taking it. The child reached the edge of the table. She was so short that her chin barely cleared the height of the furniture. Her large, dark eyes scanned the disorder. Augustus saw her frown. It was not an expression of greed or astonishment at wealth. It was an expression of annoyance. B looked at the crumpled papers, looked at the uncapped pens rolling dangerously close to the edge, and looked at the mountains of green bills strewn without any logic. For B's brilliant mind, it was painful. In her world, where every cent counted, money was respected, cared for, and above all, numbers had to have an order. The chaos of that table offended her innate sense of mathematical logic. Augustus watched as the child extended her small hand. "Do it," the millionaire whispered, clenching his jaw. "Take it. Confirm that I am right. Confirm that you are all the same." B's hand touched the first stack of $100 bills. Augustus exhaled, feeling a sickening mixture of triumph and sadness. He had her. He could fire them now. He could be alone and safe again in his fortress of ice. But then the child did something that was not in Augustus's script, something that made the millionaire gasp and freeze in his chair, unable to understand what his eyes were seeing. B did not put the bill in her pocket, nor did she look around with that furtive guilt of someone who knows they are doing something wrong. Instead, with a delicacy that contrasted with her small, cold-chapped hands, the child smoothed the bill on the table, ironing it with the palm of her hand, removing a crease in the corner as if she were mending a wound. Augustus, glued to the screen in his study, frowned. "What is she doing?" he thought, puzzled. "She's stacking them to take them all together. That's it." But Bea didn't stop there. She picked up another stack, and then another. With absolute concentration, the child began to create neat piles on the table. She separated the $100 bills to the right, the $50s to the left. The crumpled papers that were not money she moved to a corner, classifying them as trash or documents, depending on whether they had important writing or not. She looked like a tiny bank teller in miniature. Her lips moved silently, counting 1, 2, 3, 4. You could read it on her lips. Augustus felt his mouth go dry. The child was not stealing. The child was working. She was bringing order to the chaos he had deliberately created. Then, Bea did something even more surprising. She opened her school backpack, the one with the broken zipper, and took out her math notebook and a chewed-up pencil. She opened a clean page, wrote something in large, round handwriting, then counted the bills again, passing her index finger over each one to avoid making a mistake. Suddenly, the child paused, her small forehead furrowed with concern. She recounted the pile of $100 bills. She shook her head. Something wasn't right. Augustus leaned his face closer to the monitor, fascinated despite himself. "What's happening now?" he whispered. Bea got off the sofa and knelt on the carpet. She began to look under the table, lifting magazines, looking under the armchair. Augustus held his breath. "She's looking for more things to steal." His cynical mind thought for a second, but he was wrong. Bea stretched her little arm under the heavy leather sofa, and after a few seconds of effort, pulled out a crumpled $100 bill, covered in lint, that had rolled there, and which Augustus didn't even remember losing. The child's face lit up with a smile of pure satisfaction. She shook the bill, blew off the dust, and triumphantly placed it on the corresponding pile. "Now it's right," the child whispered. Though Augustus couldn't hear her, Bea returned to her notebook, made a final sum, drew a double line under the result, and closed the notebook with a crisp snap. Then she gathered all the piles into a perfect stack, meticulously aligned with the edge of the table, and placed her notebook on top like a paperweight crowning the work. She sat down again, crossed her hands in her lap, and sighed contentedly. The chaos had vanished. The world, at least on that table, made logical sense again. In the study, the silence was absolute. Augustus leaned back in his chair, stunned. His heart, which minutes before had pounded with the anticipation of catching a thief, now beat with a strange rhythm, a mixture of shame and awe. For 15 years, no one had passed the test. No one. And now, a 7-year-old girl with worn shoes had not only not stolen a cent but had found lost money and organized it better than his own accountant. Augustus slowly stood up. His legs felt heavy. He needed to see it with his own eyes. He needed to go down and look at that notebook. He left the study and walked towards the living room. But this time his steps were not those of a hunter, but of a man who had just discovered that the map he had used his whole life was wrong. Augustus opened the double doors of the living room with a deliberate dry thump. The sound echoed like thunder in the silence of the room. Bea gave a small jump on the sofa, clutching her pencil to her chest, as if it were a small weapon of defense. Her large eyes widened even further as she saw the imposing figure of the homeowner advancing towards her. The millionaire walked slowly with his hands behind his back, scrutinizing the scene. The table, once a battleground of paper and currency, now looked like the display window of a Swiss bank. The bills were aligned with surgical precision. "Who gave you permission to touch my table?" Augustus asked. His voice was deep, but it no longer had that cutting steel edge from before. Now there was a vibrant, almost fearful curiosity hidden beneath the gruffness. B lowered her head, ashamed. Her braids fell over her shoulders. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered in a faint voice. "It was all mixed up. My mommy says that mess brings bad luck, and the numbers were sad." Augustus stopped dead. The numbers were sad. Yes, they were all mixed up. The 50s don't get along with the 100s if they're not in order. They get lost. Augustus approached the table and picked up the school notebook that crowned the stack of money. It was a cheap notebook, with rough, gray pages, its cover mended with adhesive tape. He opened it. There, in childish but firm handwriting, was the breakdown. Large green bills, 105s, 450 units, $45,000. Medium green bills, 50s, 100 units, $5,000. Total on table, 4900s. Under the sofa, dirty, $100. Final sum, exactly $50,000. Augustus felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't just a sum. It was a perfect audit done by a child who had probably never seen a $100 bill in her mother's hand. He looked at B. The child was trembling, expecting a reprimand, expecting to be sent away. "Do you like mathematics, Beatrice?" he asked, softening his tone for the first time in years. "Yes, sir. They're easy. Numbers never lie. People lie, but numbers don't. If you have two and take away one, there's always one left. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor." That sentence hit Augustus harder than any insult. People lie, numbers don't. "Let's see if that's true," Augustus said, feeling a spark of challenge. "If I have, whoosher, ling ling ling, A, N, D, I, N, V, E, S, T, I, T, A, T, woo. Cincizeci, zero an investitat 5. 2,500 profit, sir. Total $52,500. Augustus blinked. It was fast. Too fast for a 7-year-old. And if I buy 12 houses at Sir, ling ling ling, E, A, C, H, 4,000 each, 48,000, she replied instantly, like a spring. "And you have $2,000 left from the $50,000 on the table." Augustus was breathless. He was facing a prodigy, a rough diamond wrapped in a worn school uniform. At that moment, the kitchen door burst open. Eleanor ran in, her face pale, wiping her hands on her apron. She had heard Mr. Augustus's voice, and panic seized her. "Mr. McPherson, I'm sorry," Eleanor cried, running towards her daughter. "B, I told you not to touch anything. Forgive me." "Sir, please don't fire us. She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's doing. I swear if anything is missing, I'll pay for it by working, but please." Eleanor hugged Bea, protecting her with her body, awaiting the millionaire's fury. Awaiting dismissal, Augustus looked at the terrified mother and the brilliant child. He looked at the perfectly ordered money. For the first time in a long time, the ice armor around his heart cracked. He realized he had been on the verge of committing a terrible injustice, driven by his own bitterness. "Calm down, Eleanor," Augustus said, raising a hand. "No one is going to be fired today." Eleanor stopped, tears in her eyes, confused. "No, but the money. Your daughter hasn't touched anything she shouldn't have." In fact, Augustus paused and looked at Bea with a mixture of respect and something that could be called affection. "Your daughter has just given me a lesson in order that even my best accountants haven't achieved." Augustus took a $100 bill from the perfect stack. "Here, B, for your audit work." Eleanor was about to protest, but Augustus cut her off with a look. "It's not charity, Eleanor. It's payment for a professional service. This child has a gift, and it would be a sin against God to waste it." That day, something changed in the mansion. Augustus didn't become a saint overnight. He remained a difficult and reserved man, but he started leaving advanced math books, forgotten in the living room. He started leaving complex problems written on makeshift whiteboards, and B, always curious, solved them. A silent, secret bond formed between the lonely old king and the little princess of numbers. A bond that would soon be tested by the true darkness approaching the house. They say where there is much light, the shadows grow darker. And in Augustus's mansion, the small light that B had ignited with her innocence was about to attract the darkest and most dangerous shadow of all, family, or rather, what was left of it. Roger was Augustus's only nephew. He was 35. He drove a red sports car his uncle had paid for and wore designer suits that cost more than Eleanor would earn in 5 years of hard work. But behind that facade of success and white smiles, Roger was an empty man, a vulture patiently waiting for the beast to fall so he could devour the remains. He had never worked a real day in his life. His ventures always failed, and always ended with him in Augustus's study, asking for another check to get him out of a jam. For Roger, Augustus was not an uncle. He was an ATM with an expiry date, and he had already done the calculations. The old man's fortune was immense, and having no children of his own, everything would fall into Roger's hands. It was his birthright, or so he believed. That Tuesday afternoon, Roger arrived at the mansion unannounced, as he usually did, to greet his dear uncle and, incidentally, scout the territory. He entered with his own keys, whistling, already feeling like the owner of everything. But as he passed near the library, he stopped dead. The door was ajar. Roger peered in, curiously. What he saw chilled him to the bone. Augustus, the man who had never dedicated more than 10 consecutive minutes to him without looking at his watch, was sitting in his favorite armchair, and at his feet, sitting on the carpet surrounded by antique-bound books, was the housekeeper's daughter. "Look here, B," Augustus was saying with unfamiliar patience. "Compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe, according to Einstein. If you save this today, tomorrow it's worth double. So, it's better to save than spend on candy, right, Uncle Augustus?" The child replied, laughing. "Uncle Augustus." Roger felt a pang of jealousy so sharp that he had to grip the doorframe. That dirty little brat called him uncle. Augustus barely grunted a greeting to him, his own blood nephew, and with that child, he melted like a loving grandfather. Roger stealthily retreated before being seen. His mind, poisoned by greed, began to race at 1,000 miles an hour. He walked towards the kitchen looking for water and crossed paths with Eleanor, who was scrubbing the floor on her knees. "Good afternoon, Mr. Roger," she said humbly, lowering her gaze. He didn't even reply. He looked at her with disgust, as if she were a cockroach that had snuck into his future home. What are these two plotting? He thought. They're coaxing the old man. They want to get into the will? The confirmation of his fears came a few minutes later. Roger entered Augustus's study, taking advantage of the fact that he was still in the library with the child. He began to rummage through the papers on the desk, looking for something, anything, and he found it. It was a bank transfer receipt. Roger read it, and his eyes almost popped out of his head. Elite Private Academy, annual tuition and monthly fees, $30,000. Beneficiary, Beatrice Santos. Roger crumpled the paper in his fist, trembling with rage. His uncle was spending a fortune to educate the cleaner's daughter at the city's most exclusive school, the same school attended by the children of senators and big businessmen. "This is it," Roger fumed, his face disfigured by anger. "You're spending my inheritance, you stupid old man. You're throwing my money away on this trash." He understood that the danger was real. If Augustus continued to grow fond of the child, he could change the will, he could leave them something, or worse, he could decide to leave everything to them and create a foundation or some philanthropic nonsense managed by that child genius in the future. Roger put the paper in his pocket and left the study. He no longer felt like greeting his uncle. Now he had a mission. He had to get them out of there, but he couldn't just ask Augustus to fire them. It was clear the old man was under their spell. No, it had to be something definitive, something that would destroy Augustus's trust forever, something that would touch the millionaire's most sensitive nerve, his paranoia that everyone was stealing from him. As he walked towards his sports car, Roger looked towards the library window, where the silhouettes of the old man and the child could be seen. "Enjoy your books while you can, little bookworm," he muttered with a cruel smile, "because soon you'll be back in the gutter you crawled out of, and your mother will go with you, dragging her shame." The plan was already forming in his head. It would be dirty, it would be low, but it would be effective. Roger was willing to do anything for his money, even destroy the life of an innocent child. The night Roger chose to execute his plan was a stormy one. It seemed as if the sky itself knew the wickedness that was about to unfold under the roof of the McPherson mansion and wept in anticipation. Roger had insisted on organizing a small family dinner with his uncle. He said he wanted to celebrate a supposed new real estate deal. But the only celebration he had in mind was the downfall of Eleanor and her daughter. He arrived early with a rehearsed smile and a bottle of expensive wine under his arm. Augustus, though naturally distrustful, was in a good mood. The past few weeks with B nearby, solving riddles and organizing his library, had brought back a spark of life he thought extinguished. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel like a marble tomb. Eleanor served the table diligently, moving silently like a helpful shadow. Bea was sitting on a high stool in the kitchen, finishing her schoolwork, out of sight of the masters, just as the rules dictated, although Augustus already allowed her to be closer. "Uncle, go wash your hands. I'll pour the wine," Roger said with cloying amiability. Augustus nodded and headed to the guest bathroom. Before entering, he took off his watch, a solid gold Patek Philippe, a collector's item valued at over $50,000. It was his most prized possession, the only memento he kept of his own father. He left it on the marble ledge in the foyer, a habit he had had for decades when he was at home. As soon as the bathroom door closed and the sound of the tap was heard, Roger acted. His eyes gleamed with malice. He approached the ledge, took the heavy gold watch, and slipped it into his trouser pocket. His heart beat fast, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the harm he was about to cause. He walked stealthily towards the kitchen. Eleanor was in the dining room finishing, setting the cutlery. Bea was alone, focused on her notebook. "Hello, little one," Roger said in a falsely sweet voice that made Bea shiver. "Hello, Mr. Roger," she replied politely, without looking up much. "Is that your backpack?" he asked, pointing to the old, patched pink backpack hanging from the back of an empty chair. "Yes, sir." "How nice," he said. And taking advantage of Bea turning to erase something in her notebook, Roger passed by the chair. With a quick, sleight-of-hand movement, he pulled the watch from his pocket and dropped it into the mesh side pocket of the child's backpack. The weight of the gold pulled the fabric down, but no one noticed. The crime was done, the trap was sprung. And before we see this bomb of injustice explode, I want to ask you something, my friend. If you feel Roger's malice as indignant as I do, if you have ever seen an innocent person pay for others' faults, subscribe to the channel right now. Click the subscribe button and leave me a comment telling me from what city you are following this story. I want to know who the good-hearted people are who are accompanying us today. Your comment helps us a lot to continue creating. Let's return to dinner. Augustus came out of the bathroom, and they sat down to eat. Dinner proceeded normally, although Roger was restless, constantly looking towards the foyer and then towards his uncle. He waited for the right moment. When Eleanor brought the coffee, Roger cast his bait. "Uncle, what time is it, by the way? Where's your watch? I don't see you wearing it. You never take it off." Augustus instinctively touched his wrist. The bare skin surprised him. "Ah, right. I left it in the foyer when I washed my hands. I'll go get it. I don't like to leave it lying around." Augustus got up calmly. He went to the foyer. Roger counted mentally. 3, 2, 1. "Eleanor!" Augustus's shout echoed through the entire house, making the crystal glasses tremble. It was not a shout of anger. It was a shout of panic. Eleanor ran out of the kitchen, pale. Bea timidly peeked from behind the door. "Yes, sir? What's wrong?" "My watch. My father's watch. I left it here 20 minutes ago. It's not here." Augustus was red, frantically searching the floor, moving ornaments. Someone took it. Roger appeared in the doorway, feigning surprise. "What do you mean it's not there, Uncle? Are you sure? No one has entered or left the house, except..." Roger left the sentence hanging in the air, like a sword over Eleanor's head, his serpent-like eyes fixed on the mother and daughter. "Except who?" Augustus asked, breathing with difficulty. "Well, Uncle," Roger said, approaching and placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. "I didn't want to say anything, but you know what they say. A leopard doesn't change its spots. You have strange people living here, people who need money." Eleanor instantly understood the accusation. She clasped her hands to her chest, horrified. "Mr. McPherson, no, for God's sake, no. I would never touch anything of yours. I've been here for months." "You know me. You might not, Eleanor," Roger interrupted with soft venom. "But children see shiny things and can't resist, especially children who have nothing." Augustus looked at Bea. The child was paralyzed in the kitchen doorway, her large eyes filled with tears, feeling the weight of a guilt that wasn't hers. Doubt, that terrible seed Augustus had tried to pluck from his heart, sprouted strongly again, fed by his nephew's words. "Check their things, Uncle," Roger whispered. "If they have nothing to hide, they won't mind." The air in the room became unbreathable. The accusation had been made, and a child's innocence was about to be violated in the cruelest possible way. The mansion's foyer became an improvised courtroom, cold and ruthless, where the presumption of innocence did not exist. Eleanor stood before Augustus and Roger, trembling like a leaf in the wind, not from guilt, but from pure indignation and fear. "Fear of losing everything for a lie. Mr. McPherson," Eleanor pleaded, her hands clasped as if in prayer. "Look into my eyes. I've been taking care of your house, your clothes, your food for months. Has a cent ever gone missing? Has a silver spoon ever disappeared? By the memory of my deceased husband, I swear we haven't touched that watch. Augustus looked at Eleanor with a visible internal struggle on his face. He wanted to believe her. His heart, the one that Bea had slowly thawed with her numbers and her smile, screamed that this woman was honest. But his mind, hardened by years of betrayals, whispered the poisonous doubt Roger had planted. Necessity makes thieves of us all, uncle. Words are carried away by the wind. Eleanor, Roger interrupted with violent abruptness. What matters here is proof, and if they have nothing to fear, they won't mind if we search that ridiculous backpack. Without waiting for an answer, and with an aggressiveness that made Bea gasp, Roger advanced towards the chair where the child's school backpack rested. No, Eleanor cried, trying to interpose herself. Don't touch my daughter's things, she's a child. Get out of the way, Roger bellowed, pushing Eleanor aside with disdain. Augustus took a step forward, uncomfortable with his nephew's violence. Roger, enough with the roughness. If you're going to search, do it, but don't touch them. Roger smiled smugly, grabbed the worn backpack by the straps, lifted it into the air as if it were a hunting trophy or an infected garbage bag. Bea covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with terror. Let's see what the little angels are hiding, Roger said with a theatrical and cruel movement. He turned the backpack upside down and shook it hard over the foyer table. Out tumbled the gray-page notebooks. Out tumbled the pencil case with the broken zipper. Out tumbled the chewed-up pencils and an apple wrapped in a paper napkin for the next day's recess. Bea's poverty and effort were exposed there, humble objects on the polished wood. And then came the sound that broke Eleanor's heart. Clank, a heavy, metallic, golden sound. Augustus's Patek Philippe watch fell from among the math books and hit the table, spinning on itself until it stopped under the light of the chandelier, gleaming with a silent and terrible accusation. The silence that followed was absolute, deadly. Eleanor felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Her breath caught in her throat. Bea looked at the watch with disbelief, as if it were a monster that had just magically appeared. Roger let out a triumphant laugh, a dry, cruel laugh that echoed off the marble walls. I knew it, he shouted, pointing at the watch with an accusing finger. There it is. Look, uncle, look with your own eyes. I told you they were thieves, starving wretches who bite the hand that feeds them. Augustus looked at the watch, his face paling. The disappointment that crossed his eyes was more painful for Eleanor than any physical blow. He looked like a man who had just seen his last hope in humanity die. No, she whispered in a faint voice, backing away. It wasn't me, Mr. McPherson. It wasn't me. The numbers. I didn't. Shut up, you thieving brat, Roger yelled, approaching her menacingly. I bet you were already thinking of selling it to buy new shoes, eh? What a disgrace, using a child to steal. Eleanor fell to her knees in front of Augustus. She no longer cared about pride. She wept inconsolably, clutching the millionaire's trousers. Mr. McPherson, it's a trap. Someone put it there. Bea would never do that. Kill me if you want. Call the police, but please don't believe my daughter is a thief. Please, sir. Please. Roger looked at his uncle impatiently. Are you still going to listen to her lies, uncle? Throw them out. Throw them out right now, or I'll call the police to take them away in handcuffs. That's what these rats deserve. Augustus was motionless, looking alternately at the gold watch, the tear-streaked face of the kneeling mother, and finally, the terrified but clear eyes of the child who loved mathematics. The pain in the old man's chest was unbearable. Everything indicated they were guilty. The evidence was there, but something, a small logical voice in his head, the same voice that Bea had awakened with her math problems, told him that the equation didn't add up. Roger smiled, feeling victorious, but he didn't know he had made a miscalculation. He had underestimated not his uncle's heart, but his intelligence. The silence that followed the watch's fall was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Roger was breathing heavily, a barely disguised triumphant smile on his lips, awaiting his uncle's outburst of fury. He expected Augustus to grab Eleanor by the arm and throw her out into the street in the rain. He expected shouts, insults, the definitive end of that invasion of poverty into his future inheritance. But the outburst never came. Augustus remained motionless, staring at the gold watch gleaming on the dark wood of the table. His breathing slowly calmed, transitioning from initial shock to a calculating coolness. His eyes, which seconds earlier reflected pain, now shone with the metallic glint of a mind processing data at dizzying speed. The millionaire slowly crouched down, not to pick up the watch, but to get to Bea's level. The child was trembling, her face wet with tears and snot, terrified by the bad man's shouts. "Beatrice," Augustus said in a soft, firm voice, so different from the tone, Roger expected that even the nephew took a step back, confused. "Look at me." The child looked up, her tears flowing. "Wipe your tears. Tears cloud our vision, and we need to see clearly. We're going to solve a math problem. You and I. Are you ready?" Eleanor stopped crying for a second, looking at her employer in disbelief. "A math problem now?" "Yes." "Yes, sir," B stammered, wiping her eyes with the cuff of her sweater. "Good. Listen to the problem's data." Augustus stood up and turned to Roger, pinning him with a gaze that made his nephew's skin crawl. Variable A, the watch was on my wrist at 8:00 p.m. Variable B, I went to the bathroom at 8:05 p.m. and left it on the ledge. Variable C, you, Roger, shouted that the watch was missing at 8:25 p.m. Augustus began to walk around the table like a shark circling its prey. "We have a time window of 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, Variable D, which is Eleanor, was serving soup and did not leave the dining room. I saw her. Variable E, which is Beatrice, was sitting on that kitchen stool doing her homework." "That's a lie," Roger interrupted nervously, sweating cold. "She could have gotten up when we weren't looking. They're quick, Uncle. They're like rats." Augustus raised a hand, commanding silence without needing to shout. "That's where your equation fails, Roger, because you forgot about Variable F." "Variable F? What the hell are you talking about, Uncle? Stop playing games and kick them out. The watch was in her backpack. It's definitive proof." Augustus smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was a sad, disappointed smile. The smile of someone who confirms that their own blood is rotten. "Variable F, dear nephew, is technology." Augustus took his mobile phone from his jacket pocket. With a calm motion, he opened an app and projected the image onto the huge television screen that dominated the living room, directly behind where Roger was standing. "Remember the day I left the $50,000 on the table?" Augustus asked. "That day I realized I needed to protect this house, not from the employees, Roger. They proved to be more honest than any partner I've ever had. I needed to protect it from parasites." On the television screen appeared a crisp, high-definition 4K recording. It was the foyer footage from barely half an hour ago. Everyone looked at the screen. Augustus was seen entering the bathroom. The watch was visible on the ledge, and then Roger appeared on the giant screen. Roger looked around with a guilty face. He was clearly seen extending his hand, taking the watch, and slipping it into his pocket. His malicious smile was visible. Then, the camera angle changed and showed the kitchen. Roger was seen approaching B from behind, feigning friendliness, and with a quick movement, dropping the watch into the open backpack while the child was erasing something in her notebook. The silence in the room broke, but this time it was from Eleanor's gasp of horror. "Me God," the mother exclaimed, bringing her hands to her mouth. "It was you. You put it there." B looked at the screen with wide eyes. "The camera saw it," the child cried, pointing at the TV. "The camera doesn't lie, like numbers." Roger was pale as a corpse. He backed up until he hit the wall. There was no escape. The evidence was irrefutable, projected on 60 inches for the world to see his baseness. "Uncle, I can explain," Roger stammered, his voice turning into a high-pitched thread. "It was a joke. I just wanted to test them. I wanted to make sure they were trustworthy for you. I did it for you." Augustus turned off the television with a dry click. The screen went black, but the truth was already illuminated. "Don't insult me anymore, Roger," Augustus said in a voice laden with infinite weariness. "You didn't do it for me. You did it out of greed. You saw that I was helping a brilliant child have a future, and you were afraid that your share of the pie would get smaller." Augustus approached his nephew. Roger, who had always felt superior due to his youth and strength, now looked like a frightened child facing the old man's moral authority. "You thought that because they were poor, their word was worth less than yours," Augustus continued. "Did you think that because I was old, I was stupid? But you forgot the most important thing B taught me: order. And you, Roger, you are chaos. You are the error in the account, and errors are corrected." Augustus turned to Eleanor and B. His posture changed. His shoulders relaxed. "Eleanor, Beatrice," he said in a broken voice, "I ask for your forgiveness. I ask for your forgiveness for allowing this trash to enter our house and humiliate you. I should never have doubted for a second." Roger tried to speak again. He tried to appeal to blood, to family. "Uncle, please, I'm your nephew. You can't do this to me for some housekeepers." Augustus looked at him with absolute contempt. "They are not housekeepers, Roger. They are my family now, because family is not the blood that runs through your veins. It is the loyalty shown through actions. And you are nothing to me anymore." The millionaire pointed to the main door with a trembling but authoritative finger. "Get out, and leave the car and house keys on the table. I never want to see your face again as long as I live." Justice had arrived, and it had not arrived with violence, but with the crushing truth that only light can bring to darkness. Roger, defeated, humiliated by his own malice, had to empty his pockets and leave into the storm, abandoning the life of luxury he thought he had secured. Expelled by the honesty of a child and the firmness of an old man who had just awakened. The final slam of the door as Roger left the mansion echoed like a cannon shot, marking the end of a war and the beginning of a peace the house hadn't known for decades. Outside, the storm raged fiercely, carrying with it the toxicity and greed of a man who had everything and lost it for not having a heart. Inside, the silence that remained was not heavy or cold. It was a clean silence, like the air after rain. Augustus stood in the middle of the foyer, looking at the closed door. His shoulders, always rigid and proud, slumped. Suddenly, he no longer seemed like the fearsome real estate magnate. He seemed simply an old man, tired and deeply ashamed. He slowly turned to Eleanor and Bea. The mother was still hugging the child, protecting her from a danger that had already departed. Augustus felt a lump in his throat as he saw the fear that still lingered in their eyes. Fear that he, with his initial mistrust, had helped to fuel. "Eleanor," Augustus said, and his voice broke. He had to clear his throat to regain composure. "Please, get up from the floor." Eleanor stood up, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. "Mr. McPherson, I'll go tidy the kitchen, and then we'll go to our room. I'm so sorry for all this commotion." "No," Augustus interrupted softly. "You're not tidying anything today, and please, stop calling me sir with that fear." The millionaire walked to the nearest sofa and sank into it, covering his face with his hands for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were moist. "I have to ask for your forgiveness. And not just for tonight. I have to ask for your forgiveness for the first day." Eleanor looked at him, confused. "The first day? The $50,000 on the table," Augustus confessed, looking at Bea. "It wasn't an accident. It was a test. I wanted you to fail. I wanted to prove to myself that all people are bad, that everyone wants to steal from me. I was so sick with bitterness that I used my money to try to corrupt a child's innocence." Bea, who had been listening intently, gently detached herself from her mother's embrace and approached the old man. She placed her small hand on Augustus's knee. The contact made the millionaire flinch. "But we didn't fail, Uncle Augustus," the child said sweetly, and the formula was corrected. "My teacher says, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake at the beginning of the problem. What matters is that the final result is correct." Augustus smiled through his tears and placed his large, wrinkled hand over the child's small one. "You're right, my little genius. The final result is what counts, and the result is that you two are the only true things I have in this life." Augustus stood up with renewed energy, went to the dining room where dinner had been interrupted, and began to remove Roger's plates with a gesture of disgust, throwing the used napkin into the trash. "Eleanor, sit at the table," he ordered, but this time it was a warm invitation. But, sir, I'm the employee. It's not appropriate. As of today, the rules of this house change," Augustus declared firmly. "You will continue to work here, yes, because I know you are a proud woman who likes to earn her salary, but I will no longer dine alone at this immense table like a foolish king in his castle. We will dine together. And Bea," the millionaire looked at the child, "you will have everything your mind needs. Books, tutors, the best universities." Roger was right about one thing. I was spending my inheritance, and I plan to spend every last cent of it making sure you become the brilliant woman you are destined to be. Because you taught me that money saved rots, but money invested in goodness multiplies. That night, as the storm lashed against the windows, genuine laughter was heard in the dining room of the McPherson mansion for the first time in 20 years. There were no champagne toasts or fancy guests, just an old man, a mother, and a child eating hot soup, united by an invisible but indestructible bond. Augustus looked around and understood something fundamental. Roger had taken his sports car and his expensive suits, but he had left poor. He, Augustus, was without his gold watch on his wrist, but for the first time in his life, he felt immensely rich. The downfall of the arrogant had given way to the rise of a new family. But the story doesn't end here, my friends, because the seed planted that night would take years to bear its most impressive fruit. and destiny had reserved one last glorious surprise for B, the child who innocently counted bills. Time is the fairest architect of all. It places every brick in its place and demolishes what lacks solid foundations. 20 years have passed since that stormy night, when a gold watch almost destroyed a life. Today, the McPherson mansion is no longer a place of silence and shadows. Today, it is the headquarters of the Augustus McPherson Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing scholarships to brilliant children from low-income backgrounds. And in the main office, sitting in the same leather chair where old Augustus used to watch his cameras with suspicion, is Beatrice. Bea is no longer the child with braids and worn shoes. She is a young woman, elegant and powerful, graduated with honors in economics from one of the best universities in the world. But if you look closely, you can still see in her eyes that spark of curiosity that seeks to bring order to chaos. Mr. Augustus passed away 3 years ago, peacefully in his bed, holding the hand of the daughter life had given him. He did not die alone and bitter as he feared. He left surrounded by love, knowing that his legacy was in the cleanest and most capable hands possible. He left everything in Beatrice's name. There were no disputes because Roger, consumed by his own debts and vices, never dared to return. Eleanor, her hair now silver and her back a little more tired, no longer cleans floors. She is the foundation's director of well-being and ensures that no family lacks a meal. She lives with the dignity of a queen mother, watching as her daughter, the one she cried and pleaded for, now runs an empire with justice and kindness. On B's desk, in a silver frame, there are no ostentatious diplomas. There is an old-school notebook with gray pages and a mended cover, open to a page where childish handwriting says, "Final sum, exactly $50,000. It is her daily reminder, a reminder that true wealth is not in a bank account, but in the values we carry within. B learned that money can buy a house, but not a home. It can buy a watch, but not time, and it can buy company, but never loyalty. She showed the world that honesty is not a weakness of the poor, but humanity's greatest strength. That when you do the right thing, even when no one is watching, or when you think no one is watching, life takes care of returning that integrity to you, multiplied 1,000-fold. And so, we close this story, my friend. A story that began with a trap and ended with a lesson in love. I hope this tale has touched your heart as much as mine. If so, I invite you with all my affection to subscribe to our channel right now. Your like and subscription are the engine that drives us to continue finding and telling these stories that inspire us to be better. Leave me a comment. What would you do if you found that amount of money? Do you think honesty is still the best path in these times? Thank you for joining me to the end. I am your narrator and friend, and I await you in the next video that is already appearing on your screen with another story that will move you to tears. Until next time, and may God bless you.